In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing this show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube.
Welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Nathan Seelove.
And I'm Michael Bloom.
And today we have a very sad episode.
Yeah. And legal centric, very judge centric episode.
Yeah, very judge centric. So today Michael and I are going to spend some time talking about obviously the tragic loss of Judge Ruth Bader Ginsberg, who passed away at the age of 87 years old due to complications from cancer. And a lot of talk right now in the country is focused a lot on the political ramifications, and we definitely are going to get into that. Mm-hmm. But our first segment is going to focus on just talking about the life and the legacy of this amazing American hero. And after that, we're going to get into the political ramifications.
American hero is the right way to put it. Like,
yeah.
We so often designate only people that do, that like sacrifice themselves or like lose something in like war or something like that as American heroes. But the incredible resolve and resiliency that she has shown throughout her life, throughout so many losses, and the results that she has delivered to the American people have just been astounding. She is truly a hero.
Yeah. And then our last segment today, we're just going to have a, discussion about free speech hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And, just something that'll be an interesting, hopefully thought-stimulating conversation to get our minds off of what's happened this week.
Yeah.
So before we get started with that, let's talk about something a little bit less depressing. COVID numbers.
Yay. Yeah. So this week worldwide, there are 31.8 million cases, which is up from 30.1 million cases last week. The total active cases worldwide is 7.4 million active cases, up from 7.3 million last week. And at this point worldwide, we've seen 974,000 deaths, up from 944,000 last week. So increases on all fronts, not the same kind of like velocity that we've seen. And the 7.4 million up from 7.3 is a bit heartening. It's a bit slower than we've seen, which is good. In the U.S., we've had 7.1 million total cases, up from 6.9 million last week. And this week, we're pretty much flat on active cases compared to last week, both at 2.5 million, which is really exciting. Like, as we mentioned last week, when that goes flat and starts going negative, that's when we're getting more recoveries than we are getting new cases, which is the direction we want to go.
So actually less depressing then.
Yes,
Good.
yeah, actually less depressing. But as always, still 205,000 people have died at this point, up from 201,000 last week at this time, which is terrible.
Yeah. Or as Trump would call it, a great success.
Yeah, a flu, really.
Yeah.
I saw some pictures of a spontaneous kind of memorial set up at the Washington Memorial recently with 200,000, small American flags. And even with these little, 5x4 flags, it's staggering to see how many 200,000 is.
Yeah. We messed up.
Yeah.
The United States messed up.
Yeah.
And I mean, try to sell it to me any way you want it to. Try to come up with whatever excuse you can. There's no other way to sell it. Numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
We screwed up.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. Like, and it's only now, I mean, it's been relatively apparent all along, but it's getting more and more apparent how much we've screwed up. Like stories coming out about misappropriation of funds that were supposed to go to PPE actually going to defense contractors. Like just so many levels of mismanagement. And fundamentally, to Nathan's point, like we make up, you know, in the 20s to 30% of the worldwide cases in any given at any given time, with only making up 5% of the world's population. And we've got some of the highest death rates. Not all those people had to die.
Yeah. Which, you know, I was seeing this Trump surrogate trying to say that the reason why there are so many deaths is because there's so much testing. It's like the testing is why we have so many deaths. That's
oh my gosh.
They're tests for cases, not tests for deaths, you dimwit.
Wait a second. But how do you tell if they're dead, Nathan?
I mean, I'm no doctor, but the arguments are lazy at this point. They're not even trying to be intellectually honest. They're not even trying to pretend, like they're not even trying to convince people that are not already on their side. They're just trying to say something that if you are able to suspend your disbelief to the point where nothing anybody could say would change your mind, that you can go along with it as an explanation.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that is only going to work on people that are 100% already for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And there are two issues with that on both sides. So the issue on the side of conservatives is that ain't a majority. Mm-hmm. Like that's maybe 35% of the country. But the issue for Democrats is they're not playing by the rules. Mm-hmm. When it comes to election strategies, Republicans are not playing by the rules. There is a story about a bunch of voter registrations being thrown out in North Carolina. There are cases in which in Florida, Republicans were doing all they can to make sure that formerly convicted felons that were supposed to have been given their right to vote back cannot vote. Mm. They're not playing fair.
Yeah. And the court questions that have come up just over the past week are making the risks of something going haywire in this coming election and giving us a result that doesn't reflect the people yet again, even worse. And we'll talk a little bit about that.
But before we get into that, let's talk about the Notorious RBG.
Yeah. The badass.
Where to start?
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, where to start? I want to start sort of at the end because I started becoming interested in politics when I was in high school, when I was sort of in the middle of high school. I didn't really start immersing myself into it as much as I do now until I was in college, but Ruth Bader Ginsberg was definitely always a household name. Mm-hmm. I was always interested in certain issues even when I was a kid, but when I first started learning about Ruth Bader Ginsberg in various different cases, I was so amazed by her tenacity, her sense of righteousness.
Yeah. Her incredible intellect.
Yeah, her incredible intellect. And the thing is, I didn't know about her background. Mm-hmm. To me, she was just
a great justice. Yeah.
Yeah, she was just a great justice. And she was a great justice, but before she became a great justice, she was a great everything.
That's what struck me as I've learned about her. So I kind of got interested in her. She's kind of become like a little bit of a social phenomenon, and I was really like curious about like how that came about and who this person was that people were so into. And it coincided with a phase when I was trying to read more biographies because inspired by a previous SR that I had who had just like a shelf full of biographies. I thought it'd be really cool just to learn more about, these people. And I thought I'd start with kind of this incredible jurist and feminist icon. And I was just like totally blown away. by this person's life. And at every turn, I was expecting her at some point to get less badass. Like at some point she'd compromise. At some point, like she would do something that called into question some of the things that were clear about her. But no, it just never happened. It was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg was born in 1933 in Brooklyn, New York. She lost her mother to cancer before she graduated high school.
And the amount that she has been throughout her life that would have set a less resilient person back years. Like the day before her high school graduation, her mother dies. And then she goes on to Cornell and totally kicks ass.
Yeah. First in her class at Cornell.
Yeah. Yeah. And then she gets married like to her husband after undergrad. And
which she met at Cornell.
Yeah. And then she has a baby and he's almost immediately sent off to 2 years of active duty service. So she's left to be like essentially a single mom for a couple of years. And then when he gets back, they both enroll in Harvard Law School. He already had done a couple of years.
And while they were in Harvard, he apparently contracted testicular cancer.
Yes.
So she was taking care of her sick husband, also apparently taking notes for him in class.
Yes, yeah. So basically doing the work of two students to help keep him
doing
up.
the work of two students
at Harvard freaking law school.
At Harvard freaking law school,
where she was one of only 9 women. Yeah,
as a woman,
where her teachers were berating her for taking the spot of a man.
Yeah, the dean specifically was like berating all the women that were there. Because they took the spot of a qualified man when like it was like, 492 men.
Yeah,
so like,
exactly.
I mean, and even through that, when she eventually transferred to Columbia Law School, she graduated first in her class again.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was brilliant.
Yes. And yet, even with all that, and so like think about how much this person has fought through to succeed, to stand out already as like a 20-something-year-old. Yeah. And then she gets out of Columbia Law School with this impeccable record, including being the first female member of the Harvard Law Review. And like, let's be clear, people kill to be on the Harvard Law Review. And she couldn't get a job.
Yeah.
Because she was a woman. So like, imagine being out there and then having the injustice of the world slap you in the face and then saying to that, you know what, I'm going to go fix that.
Yeah.
So then what happened is one of her law school professors just refused to write a recommendation for any other student for this clerkship, and she ended up getting a district court clerkship from there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's so awesome. And then she went on to be a professor at Rutgers Law School, where she was incredibly beloved by her students, even though she was incredibly difficult on them, as appeared to be the trend throughout her career. Antonin Scalia, who was apparently one of her strangely close friends on the Supreme Court, talked about her just shredding anybody that came in front of her with a bad argument. She would just absolutely destroy them.
Yeah.
And then she became the first female professor ever to get tenure at Columbia Law School.
Yep.
And at the same time as she's kicking butt at Columbia Law School, earning tenure, which is one of the best law schools in the country, she's also heading up the Women's Rights Project at the ACLU.
Yeah.
And kicking ass there. She brings 6 landmark cases in front of the Supreme Court and wins 5 of them, which is an outstanding record.
And one thing that I thought was fascinating was that they weren't all specifically favored towards women.
Yeah.
Like she viewed gender equality as like she viewed the law as gender blind. There was one case that she won in which she was trying to strike down a portion of the Social Security Act that favored women over men, because it granted certain benefits to widows but not widowers.
Yeah.
So for her, it wasn't even just about women; it was about gender equality in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is something that also really fascinated me while I was looking up more about her life.
Yeah. Totally. Not could you imagine like having been disadvantaged as a woman, having to fight tooth and nail, having to have a way more impeccable record than any man you've ever had to work next to, and then turn around and start defending the discrimination against men. But what's awesome,
the tiny instance, the one instance in which that exists.
But the amazing thing was, not only that took fortitude and incredible dedication to justice, but also that it was part of this incredibly shrewd legal strategy. I mean, how do you convince a Supreme Court of all male justices that gender equality is a required issue, that discriminating against women violates the 14th Amendment? You can't go up there bringing up a woman and saying, but she needs to have rights too, because people have tried it and it doesn't work. But what she did was she built this trend of cases, like the case of the widower, where she would slowly lead the Supreme Court along, committed to more and more cases of commitment to gender equality, until eventually she was able to get them to recognize gender equality as it applied to females, and recognize that discriminating against females violated the 14th Amendment.
Yeah. And look, there's a lot of precedents that she helped to set that we just take for granted today.
Yeah.
Like what Michael just talked about, the idea of the 14th Amendment applying in cases of gender discrimination. I mean, the 14th Amendment specifically talks about equal protection under the law. And most of us reasonable people nowadays would hear that and just be like, well, yeah, of course. Like, why wouldn't that apply to women? I mean, of course it applies to women. But that's not how it used to be.
Yeah.
And she played a major role in having that become legal precedent.
Yeah.
So, like, even if you're a conservative woman who disagreed with some of her stances on abortion, or disagreed with some of her stances on, like, gay rights or the Affordable Care Act, you cannot deny the fact that a lot of the rights that you take for granted right now, she fought for. She's the reason for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. And that was all like even before she became a judge. And
then she started her career as a judge.
Yeah.
When in 1980, President Jimmy Carter appointed Ruth Bader Ginsberg to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. And then in 1993, she was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by Bill Clinton. And considering how much of a activist she has been throughout her entire life, you'd think that the Senate would probably not want to put someone on the Supreme Court like that, or at least that it would have been a very contentious fight and it would have been a narrow vote,
Yeah.
No, she was approved 96-3.
Yeah, in less than 2 months.
Yeah.
Which is very fast. Yeah. Yeah, she was,
and she was the second female Supreme Court justice ever appointed.
Yeah.
And the first Jewish female justice ever appointed.
Yeah. And then when she got to the Supreme Court,
we haven't gotten to that yet.
When she got to the Supreme Court, she persisted in her dedication to justice and equality and badassery in both her majority opinions and her dissents. Because throughout this period where she's a justice on the Supreme Court, the membership of the Supreme Court is slowly moving to the right, and also being, persuaded by the arguments of Antonin Scalia, who is an incredibly revolutionary type of justice in his jurisprudence. And so not only were her majority opinions, incredible, but she became very well known for her dissents, which were often, not only incredibly legally well reasoned, but also passionate for the causes. So a few key majority opinions that she authored. One was United States versus Virginia, which found that VMI couldn't exclude female students from enrolling, and that it violated the 14th Amendment to have a public university exclude students of a certain gender. So continuing to fight for gender equality. Olmsted versus LC, in which the court held that the Americans with Disabilities Act required that people with mental disabilities have the right to live in the community rather than an institution, as long as it was the state treatment professionals determined that they would be safe there and there could be reasonable accommodations, which basically found that these two plaintiffs who had completed their course of treatment but were still being held against their will in a mental institution for multiple years, it basically found that they, could no longer be held against their will, which is, it seems niche, but that seems like a pretty clear case of justice to me.
Duh.
For the, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For, people that are differently abled.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this one's super badass, actually, on like the environmental law front, is Friends of the Earth versus Laidlaw. And in this case, the plaintiffs of South Carolina's North Tiger region sued this industrial polluter in their area. And the polluter claimed that the case couldn't be brought because they had stopped polluting at that point. And the Supreme Court found, and Justice Ginsburg wrote, that because the polluters still retained their license to operate the factory and they could reopen similar operations elsewhere, it couldn't be moot because we needed an incentive for them, not to be able to go and violate the Clean Water Act. And they also ruled that plaintiffs, the residents in this case, didn't need to prove an actual harm in order to sue the polluter. Because that would be really hard, right? Like you would have to get sick from their pollution in order to prove some kind of actual harm. But Ginsburg wrote, injury to the plaintiffs was from lessening the aesthetic and recreational values of the area, because the residents were scared of using the river because they knew about the history of pollution from this plant. And so basically, it gave the Clean Water Act teeth in order for plaintiffs to be able to sue polluters for violating their clean water rights.
And she's also played pivotal roles on votes to expand marriage equality to everybody, which, a lot of that is how I was my first exposure to Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a Supreme Court justice sort of in the modern time. Major cases about immigration, about voter rights, in some cases where she has been writing the majority opinion, some cases in which she has written famous dissenting opinions. But regardless, she always stood for what she thought was right. And she had a major effect on our legalistic view of gender equality, our legalistic view of, equality for different sexual orientations, for different races. It is staggering, just how much this woman was able to do with her life.
I know.
And she had a long ass life.
She did.
I mean, she did have a long ass life.
Yeah. And
she is damn impressive.
Yeah. One last legal accomplishment that I really want to mention, because it shows you how relentless she was in the pursuit of justice, was the case of Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire Company, which is where Lilly Ledbetter in federal court had won $3 million against Goodyear on a gender discrimination case because she found out that she'd been making a lower compensation than her male counterparts for a number of years. And the court actually found, and Ginsburg voted against this, that because she didn't bring her case within 180 days of the harm, it was outside the statute of limitations, which is insane. Like, you only have 180 days to bring this kind of case. Like, most statute of limitations are multiple years. So she not only did she create this incredible dissent that she read from the bench, which is pretty much as close as you get to dropping a mic on a disc track for a Supreme Court justice, but she then went on to help Obama craft the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. So she not only did a badass job on the Supreme Court, she made sure that her legal mind was applied in the right area in crafting that key legislation that helped establish and affirm fair pay and gender equality. It's so inspiring.
Yeah, she saw discrimination. She faced discrimination. Her Harvard professors got on her case about being a woman that took the spot of a man. Mm-hmm. And instead of letting that get her down, instead of listening to that, she decided to become a Supreme Court justice and right the wrongs that she had faced her entire life.
Yeah. Yeah, and even when her husband died, Marty Ginsburg, after being married for 56 years, she still never missed a single day of oral argument in the Supreme Court until 2018.
She voted on major cases in the hospital a few times.
Yeah.
Like, when she was in the hospital recovering from cancer treatments, she would vote on cases.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Yeah. Yeah. And apparently she could lift more weight than a couple of the male justices on the court until like 2010, which is crazy because that means she's like,
she's tiny, she's a tiny woman.
She's tiny, but an absolute powerhouse.
Yeah. So, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you will be missed.
Yeah.
Your legacy will never be forgotten. Your courage will never be taken for granted.
Yeah.
And your memory will continue to drive us all to continue fighting for what is right.
So now it's time for a brand new but still lighthearted segment. And we're calling it Good Actually. So Nathan, why are we calling this segment Good Actually?
Well, because one of my favorite movies is Love Actually. It's a movie that I watch almost every year for Christmas. It's the one Christmas movie that both myself and my wife both like. Mm-hmm. Mostly because my wife hates Christmas movies, and I like Christmas movies. But it's one that she actually does like. And the idea of Love Actually is that love actually is all around us. I mean, there is a lot of hate in the world, but when you really do spend some time and look around, see the relationships, you really can see that love actually is everywhere. And this kind of inspired this idea where right now the world is bleak, especially with recent events of, the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but also just, with COVID-19, with the horror show of the Trump presidency. But if you really do try to spend some time looking for good, you can actually find it. So we wanted to share a story this week that is objectively a good thing.
Yeah. So, the other thing we want to accomplish, I think, is not just give feel goods, right? We want to talk about real good things that are good on the scale of all the bad things that we talk about. Yeah. That's, I think, one of the goals of this segment. And so today we're starting off with something that we hope will be a very good thing in the future, and is a pretty cool accomplishment and glimmer of hope. And that is the Abraham Accords peace agreement treaty of peace, diplomatic relations, and full normalization between the United Arab Emirates and the State of Israel. So basically, this is the United Arab Emirates officially recognizing and creating normal diplomatic relationships with the nation of Israel, which is a huge accomplishment. It's only the third Arab country after Egypt and Jordan to agree to normalize relationships with Israel, and it's the first Persian Gulf country to do so.
Yeah. If you know a lot about the tensions in the Middle East between a lot of the majority Muslim countries and Israel, you know that the idea of a country on the Persian Gulf having a peace deal in order to normalize relations with Israel is historic.
Yeah, it's a big accomplishment. And they've had some informal relationships, but this is like the full, it's a peace treaty, which is just incredible. It's a really big accomplishment. It's one that we hope will pave the way for like future peace and cooperation in that region. So yeah, that's a pretty damn good thing. Yeah, because good actually is all around us.
All right, so now to get to the dirty politics of the week, and it is going to be dirty as hell. So within 2 hours of the nation finding out about the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, by the way, her dying wish was for the next president, whoever wins the presidency in November, to be the one that chooses her replacement. Within 2 hours, Mitch McConnell announced that he was going to be moving forward to nominate a replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, there are a few reasons why this is just awful. Now, the first one, of course, is the fact that 2 hours after it happened, you couldn't even wait till the next day.
Yeah, seriously.
Out of respect.
Yeah, I remember I took a screenshot, and the top, or the second story down of the New York Times homepage, it says, "Breaking news: Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court feminist icon, dies at 87." And right above that, "Breaking news: Senator Mitch McConnell said he would move forward quickly with President Trump nominee replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg." It's it did not take long at all.
Yeah, and the other reason why Mitch McConnell is an absolute cartoonishly evil villain in this case is that he is blatantly going against a precedent that he himself set in 2016 that he used to steal the nomination of Merrick Garland from President Barack Obama. So Antonin Scalia died about 9 months before the presidential election in 2016, which President Obama still had almost an entire fourth of his second term to go before being out of office. So Mitch McConnell's argument was that they were in an election year, so they should wait for the next president to choose. So he actually said in 2016, quote, "This nomination ought to be made by the president we're in the process of electing this year."
So because it was Obama's last term, also it could not have been the president who is currently in office. It's it's his right and ability to nominate a person for the Supreme Court.
But the president must nominate a Supreme Court justice with the advice and the consent of the Senate, which, translates into a Senate vote.
Yeah.
And McConnell, at the time, made these heated arguments on the Senate floor that the American people deserve a right to choose who the Supreme Court justice is. Like, they will decide this at the ballot box, which they didn't. The Electoral College did, but that's another discussion. So he held up this nomination. He stole this nomination for almost a year, and now, when it's not even 9 months before an election, it's like a month and a half. A lot of people have already voted. In fact, I've already voted.
Yeah, me too.
And he's saying, yes, we are going to move forward with this, with this nomination. He argued, quote, Americans reelected our majority in 2016 and expanded it in 2018 because we pledged to work with President Trump and support his agenda, particularly his outstanding appointments to the federal judiciary. Once again, we will keep our promise. President Trump's nominee will receive a vote on the floor of the United States Senate. So his argument is, oh no, it's different now because there's a Republican president. So he's admitting that he's a hypocrite. Like he's being accused of hypocrisy. He's like, oh no, I'm not a hypocrite. It's different because a Republican is president now, and a Democrat was president back then.
I'm not a hypocrite. I have only wanted a Republican candidate this whole time.
like God, he's a dirty son of a bitch.
Yeah, no,
like,
it is amazing.
I mean, and it's blatant, and he's doing it with a smile on his face. Like he knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's happy about it.
Yeah.
And this goes back to what I've said plenty of times on this program, and that is the fact that I don't think that Donald Trump is the most horrifically terrible, corrupt politician in the United States. That belongs to Mitch McConnell. Like, that firmly belongs to Mitch McConnell. Because, look, Donald Trump has completely destroyed a lot of aspects of the country. And he's a terrifying, fascistic, disgusting human being. And he's destroyed our relationships with allies. He has, his administration has made it policy to lock kids in cages. He's a terrible human being. But Mitch McConnell, the norms that he has established, the precedents that he has set, the corruption that he has normalized with a smile on his face. First off, he's been doing that way longer than Donald Trump ever became president. But second off, those will have lasting impacts.
Yeah, they really will.
If Trump loses re-election, it'll take a while for us to repair the damage, but we'll repair it eventually. But the damage that Mitch McConnell has caused is irrevocable.
Yeah, I think he's permanently eroded a number of norms within the Senate. He's taken like political expediency over, principle, procedure, process, so many times. It's like he's just willing to, scrap in the street, to play as dirty as it gets, to win. It's really astounding to watch someone like that work in such a position of power. And it really is like the perfect position for him. He's got leverage in ways that few other people have at this point. Like the ability not to bring things to the floor of the Senate, and also have a majority is just, it makes him surprisingly powerful, way more than you'd expect for someone of his ilk.
Yeah, he regularly brags about the fact that he has a pile of bills that were sent to his desk from the United States House of Representatives that he's not even allowing a vote for. Bills
just
go
wants
to his office to die.
Stop the process of governing, which I don't know. Does he think we've hit all the law quota? Like there's too many. We have too many laws. We just got to stop.
Yeah.
Because, certainly there's room to improve, and certainly there are more laws and other laws, and there's all kinds of actual freaking legislation and legislating to be done.
Yeah.
And we're so far behind.
Look, there are principled conservatives out there that I look at and I say, your principles are garbage. But at least you have principles. Like, at least you have universally applicable principles that you stick to. They might be garbage, but at least they're there.
Yeah.
He has no principles whatsoever.
Yeah.
He doesn't care. And look, I do my best to try to give most people the benefit of the doubt, but there's no benefit of the doubt to be given to Mitch McConnell. Like, one of my favorite moments during the interview that I had with Richard Ojeda was the moment where he was just like, I despise the oxygen that Mitch McConnell breathes.
That's a good impression.
I was like,
you need to be like
30%
louder.
Well, I'm trying not to blow out the microphone.
Rich, if you're listening, it's all in good fun.
Yeah. You know I love you. God, I wish he had won that primary. God, I wish he had won that. Like, imagine him in the Senate, like, just yelling at Mitch McConnell.
Yeah. So when you say about principled Republicans, do you mean, people with principles like Senator Lindsey Graham, right? Something like that?
Well, okay, when I will say I said principled conservatives.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And that doesn't actually apply to pretty much any ones that are currently in the Senate.
I don't know, man. Back in 2016, or back in the day, I guess 2016, he said very clearly, he laid it out, a very clear example. He said, quote, if there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of his first term, you can say Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make that nomination. That's super clear. That's principled. I don't see how you can impeach that.
Yeah.
Except
now he is saying, quote, when the American people elected a Republican Senate majority in 2014, Americans did so because we committed to checking and balancing the end of President Obama's lame duck presidency.
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, you got elected in 2014 because turnout was one of the lowest that it had ever been. That's why you got elected.
Yeah.
But also,
so
let's use his words against him.
Yeah. He literally said that at the time. Use my words against me. Oh man. And yet here he is. But the thing is, we just shouldn't be surprised. The frustrating and really degrading part of this is that they are playing a game that we're not playing. We as in Democrats. They are it's like the game designers didn't quite figure out all of the strategies, and so now there are strategies that work that previously everybody understood you shouldn't play. And yet they're playing them.
And look, I thought that the argument in 2016 was complete and utter bullshit.
Yeah.
I was like, Obama's the president. He's still in his term. He should get the nomination.
Mm-hmm.
And if he had gotten that nomination, if he had gotten to nominate Merrick Garland, and Merrick Garland were currently on the Supreme Court, right now, I would be like, all right, well, I'm not happy that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to be chosen by President Trump. I'm not happy with the fact that I've already voted and, you've already voted, and the next president was so close to being able to choose Ruth Bader Ginsburg for replacement.
Yeah, but it's an accident of timing. It's just...
Yeah, it's crappy timing, but at least the rules would be equal.
Yeah.
At least it would be an equal distribution of precedents and rules that were not based off of dirty politics. But that's not the case. So, look, I hate that I'm about to make some of the arguments that I'm about to make because I hate dirty politics. I have said on this podcast countless times that if everything was equal, if the process of voting was equal, if the procedures in the Senate, in the House were equal, that when it went against my way, I wouldn't be happy about it, but Like, I wouldn't be pushing for dirty politics or dirty tricks in order to get rid of it, because I want those rules to be equal.
Yeah.
Because,
So
you know,
that,
when
so that the structure of our freaking Republican democracy doesn't play sides.
Exactly. So, but that's not the case right now. They are willing to go against precedent. They are willing to completely rig the rules of the game within the confines of the law in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I'm sick of it. So, Democrats, you got to start playing dirty too. And I mean dirty. All right. There have been talks about Democrats starting to dish out impeachments in the House, because if there is an impeachment in the House and it goes to a trial in the Senate, they are required to have a trial. They're because of proceedings. And the idea is, if you can bog them down with impeachments, then maybe they won't be able to push a judge through. You could delay it for long enough. It might not work. It might work. I think they should do it. Honestly,
I mean, the laundry list of things that he could be impeached for is plenty long. It's not like
I'm not even just talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about William Barr.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about the fact
He's
that
earned
William
it.
Barr has been using the Justice Department as basically the lawyer defense
Yeah.
for
Of the ragtag Trump
of the-
gang of dirty administrators and
you
politicians.
defend the United States,
Yeah.
not the Trump administration.
Yeah, they have their own lawyers.
So
for
impeach
that.
him for that. Yeah, impeach Trump. You never impeached Trump for the emoluments clause. I think you should have. But since you didn't, do it.
Yeah, now's the
impeach
time.
him under the emoluments clause. And that's just one example. I mean, fine, get a dartboard.
Yeah.
Just start throwing, a list of all of the crimes that Trump has committed that he has not been impeached for. And the only reason why he hasn't been impeached for it is because Democrats know perfectly well that Republicans in the Senate are not going to have an ounce of moral fiber.
Yeah, just copy the homework of some of the state district attorneys that are bringing suits against Trump, like tax fraud and things.
Exactly. And look, the whole argument is, well, this is politics. Politics is dirty. So, yeah, we're hypocrites, but we have the power to do it. That's how you get power. Well, okay, fine. Then don't be pissed off at us when we play dirty too.
Yeah.
And in fact, if they do get their nominee, pack the court. Like, if Biden wins, pack the court. Now, I argued against that earlier. I argued against that when that came up in the primary. When Joe Biden argued against it, I believe that Bernie Sanders argued against it. Buttigieg was arguing for it. And I disagreed with Buttigieg. I was saying, no, I don't want that, because I don't want us to have a situation in which that becomes a precedent.
You don't want that in play.
Exactly.
If
I
that's
don't
an
want
option.
that to be a precedent.
Yeah.
But at this point, the Republican Party, the Senate Republicans, have gotten to the point where they don't care about precedents. They don't care about principles. What they're doing is technically within the confines of the law.
But it's against all these norms. It's against, well, I should say, what they're doing now is in line with the norms. What they did before is not.
Exactly.
I worry.
So they created a new precedent, and now they're completely going against it. So I say, screw precedents then.
Yeah.
If we get power, we do everything we can to take that power back. So pack the courts. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that it has to be 9 Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, and for those who may not know what packing the courts means, that basically just means adding seats to the bench. So not 9 anymore, adding more seats to that, and then filling those positions with justices, during your term. The problem, of course, is that's a strategy. It's a short-term fix with some long-term implications. And so, you worry about strategies like that. And I empathize so much with moving in the dirty direction, but I also worry so much about my initial reaction is worrying about like a race to the bottom, where everybody's like clawing tooth and nail for whatever is the like the toehold that they can get on policy, and everybody's playing so dirty, and bipartisanship totally erodes, and the only time you can get anything done is when you've got some kind of leverage over the other person. But the problem is, the alternative to that scenario in my mind is just that instead of a race to the bottom, we stay right here where Democrats are at a total disadvantage. Republicans continue to not only hold the reins of power, but gum up the works, just prevent the machine of government from running. And then I don't know if that's better.
At this point, I think it's better.
Yeah.
I think it's better for us to just start playing dirty. Look, I mean, obviously within the confines of the law,
Of course, yeah.
but start playing dirty. I mean,
And maybe fix the holes. Like play dirty to get power, and then I don't know. That's what I would love to see. Like I think that's way too much to hope for, but like if the Democrats get control, like start working on codifying the norms that we expect.
And look, I would say that's reasonable. I would say that there are some norms that it would be nice if we were able to go back to. Like I'll even say that when the Democrats did the nuclear option for appellate court justices.
And that's where they got rid of the filibuster, right?
When they got rid of the filibuster for the appellate court justices, that was Harry Reid when he was the majority leader. That was probably a mistake.
Yeah.
And
you worry about something like that coming back.
You do
to
worry
bite
about
us.
something like that, but they only did it for appellate court.
Sure.
They didn't do it for the Supreme Court. So that wasn't until Mitch McConnell did the nuclear option in order to get Gorsuch confirmed.
Yeah.
Which again, I think that was also a very bad mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I would also point out the fact that the reason why Harry Reid did the nuclear option in the first place was because Mitch McConnell was trying to hold firm on his own coalition of Republicans to not confirm any judges by the Obama administration.
Sure.
There were a massive amount of vacancies that were kept open, not just in the Supreme Court, but in a lot of the lower courts that Obama should have been able to appoint.
Yeah.
That never ended up getting appointed because Mitch McConnell held him up.
Yeah.
And
which means
Harry Reid at the time, it was the only way that he was able to get anything appointed. So I understand why he did what he did. I think it might have been a mistake, but I mean, I empathize with it.
Yeah. And and preventing vacancies from being filled slows down the whole process. Like it totally erodes justice, and justice that moves too slowly is not timely. It isn't justice. Like if you are able to only get your case through 10 or 15 years later because you literally can't find a federal judge who can hear you, that's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
those are some pretty last-ditch efforts to try to have some continued influence over the Supreme Court.
I know, but the alternative is it's
3 justices.
A 6-3 majority for conservatives on the Supreme Court, and if that happens, you can kiss Roe v. Wade goodbye.
Yeah.
You can kiss Obamacare goodbye, which with that goes pre-existing conditions.
Yep.
You can probably kiss gay rights goodbye. Or any potential strives forward in gay rights.
You can expect like all of the Trump focused like immigration crap to go through. Like it'll just get appealed up to the Supreme Court and rubber stamped.
And also, if we do end up having a a majority of Democrats in the House and the Senate and a Democrat in the White House, a lot of the legislation that they pass will probably just get struck down by the Supreme Court because, they will be a bunch of conservative activist judges.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really nerve-wracking. Not only does it put the future of progress and success of these progressive democratic policies in question, it also threatens, to your point, like decades of fighting in progress that we've made so far. Like,
yeah.
So
and this
many.
is a lifetime appointment.
Yeah, yeah. And
this is like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was nominated before I was born.
Yeah, 93. So
yeah.
She's been on the court for 27 years.
Yeah. So
and she was one of the older justices to be appointed in recent memory. Right now, the front runners for Trump are 50 years old, 52 years old. One is 38. Like, these are people that could serve on the Supreme Court for 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years, 10 presidencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really scary. And all of these front runners have those kinds of core things in common. Like, they're all relatively young. They're female for the most part. In fact, all the ones at the top of the list are. And they're very conservative. Like, life begins at conception. The ACA is bad. The Constitution is exactly what it's written to be. And no court, like, that's just a textualist interpretation of everything.
Yeah. And I would just like to give quick credit to two Republican senators, which is Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, for actually caring about fairness. Both of them have come out and said that they will not support a Supreme Court nominee chosen before the next president is inaugurated, or at least whoever wins the presidency is inaugurated. Right now, there's already 47 that have confirmed that they will vote this year. And there's 4 Republicans that have not come out and said anything quite yet. And that is Rand Paul from Kentucky, Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, Ben Sasse from Nebraska, and Tim Scott from South Carolina. So we need 2 more Republicans to come out against it in order to block it. Not sure if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Although there is one other possibility where, so in Arizona, currently the seat in Arizona is held by Republican Martha McSally. But she was appointed to that position. She was appointed to that position after John McCain passed away.
As an interim, right?
Yeah, as an interim. So the election that's going to be happening in Arizona is actually going to be a special election, which means that the person who wins will likely be taking office like right away.
Mark Kelly.
If Democrat Mark Kelly wins, then it could mean that we might only need one more Republican. Now again, the future of our nation relies on the integrity of Republicans, which never a good
quite
bet.
Works out, yeah.
But I mean, at least that's something.
Yeah. I'm very worried about the timing of all this, because on the one hand, with the election like less than a month and a half away, that's a pretty tight time frame for confirming a Supreme Court justice. On average, the people on the bench currently took about 70 days to confirm. But the thing is that they don't have to do it in a month and a half, right? Like, they have all the way until inauguration.
God, a lame duck nomination would just be, God, that would be so dirty.
It would be very...
Again, again, if that happens,
Yeah.
seriously, pack the court.
But one of the things that's really top of mind for me, which I like scares the crap out of me, but I wanted to mention, is the impact that this vacancy, or if it's filled before the election, the new member could have on deciding the outcome of the presidential election.
Yeah, that's also
a
concerning.
Bush v. Gore type scenario. So, right now with 8 members, it's a 5-3 conservative majority. If we added a conservative, which it doesn't seem unlikely that that's going to happen, it would be a 6-3 conservative majority. And there are currently more than 300 voting rights cases which are working their way through the courts. So just like an unprecedented number of voting questions that could be presented to the court. And on top of that, both presidential candidates are gearing up for a legal battle about the outcome of the election. Like Biden has unveiled a really large legal operation, including hundreds of lawyers. The Republican National Committee and the Trump campaign have pledged $20 million in spending on legal battles. It's like these people are gearing up for a death match of like the federal courts like deciding our election.
Which, you're the good guy if you're already hiring lawyers to try to challenge the results of an election before it's happened.
Yeah, no kidding. And remember, the courts have been absolutely packed with Trump nominees, and that's the federal courts. And if this ends up going to the Supreme Court and it falls along party lines, I just don't see it going in the Democratic direction. And Trump has like straight up come out and said that he expects the courts to decide this election. He said, quote, "We're going to have a victory on November 3rd, the likes of which you've never seen. Now we're counting on the federal court system to make it so that we can actually have an evening where we know who wins, not where the votes are going to be counted a week or 2 weeks later."
It's better to know the actual results a few days from the election than to have the wrong results the day of. Yeah. But
and
of
like
course Trump doesn't care about
that.
The
Bush v. Gore decision shook the foundations of our democracy. And that was in a time that was basically tepid compared to now. Now, in the face of a Supreme Court with a stolen seat, deciding an election that could be like, that has been saturated with the fertile ground of doubt intentionally by our president. Like, the president of the United States specifically trying to game the election in order not to have to relinquish power, like undermining our election system so you don't have to transition and peacefully relinquish power. That is a new low beyond which I can't imagine. I'm so worried about the absolute fabric of our election system, because that is the kind of crap that you see coming out of Venezuela and countries where they've had freaking dictators elected every year for 30 years because they've got they've got the election system rigged and controlled. He's taken a lesson from Putin on this one. So now it's time for one of our favorite segments, Ass Hat of the Week. So, Nathan, who is our ass hat this week?
Michael, our ass hat this week could not be anybody else. It's Mitch McConnell.
The inimitable Mitch McConnell.
And the thing is, we don't really have much to say in the ass hat segment that we haven't already said. But
except we didn't call him an ass hat in the main segment.
We did not call him an ass hat in the main segment. But there's just nothing else to... there's nobody else that it could be this week.
Yeah.
He is the ass hat of the world right now.
We actually had some good alternatives. And
we did.
And he
just
had
some
came
very
in right
notable
at the top.
runner-ups. And he just came in with this huge degree of ass hattery. Now, one of the funny things is we made it a rule.
Yeah.
Like when we first established ass hat of the week, that we would never have Trump be our asshat.
Yeah.
Because, if Trump was our asshat,
It's
then
no
he'd be our
fun.
asshat every week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be no fun.
Who wants to wear the same asshat all the time?
Exactly. So, but this week, this is the one week in which, even if we did allow Trump to compete for asshat, he still wouldn't win this week.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact,
of all
I
people, had the
actually-
decorum to say that he was going to wait till the end of the week to select a nominee.
Like, when Donald Trump has
Makes you
more
look good.
decorum than you. Oh my God, what the hell is wrong with you? So, Mitch McConnell, you have destroyed several of the major precedents, procedures, and foundations of our country. Your legacy will be destructive to future generations for years to come. Go screw yourself, and congratulations to Mitch McConnell for being our
Asshat of the week. So for our last segment tonight, we want to talk a little bit about free speech and some of like the free speech hypocrisy that we've been seeing these past few weeks, months, years.
Lives.
Yeah, in the in the United States.
Yeah.
Specifically, a lot of like very questionable free speech type advocacy from like conservative speakers.
Yeah. Before we get started, I do want to establish a few terms for real quick. Establish some levels of free speech. So the first level that I would say is the level that most people think of when they think of free speech, and that's on a legal level.
Mm-hmm.
So on a legal level, most people, even people that are like heavily into cancer culture and whatever, which I actually don't think is as many people as the right makes it out to be, but even people that are heavily into cancel culture still acknowledge the fact that free speech must always still be legal.
Yeah.
Like,
And that's
you might hate the fact that a person is saying racist things. You might want them to be deplatformed. You might want them to, to be fired, whatever. But like, we can mostly agree that they shouldn't be put in jail for what they said.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It is the most basic level of free speech is that the government can take action against anyone for their specific speech. And so that extends to all types of speech. Depending on which precedent you go with, there are some limitations for like direct incitement to violence, threats, and things like that. But for the most part,
you can't shout fire in a theater.
Yeah, that's actually an older precedent that has subsequently been overcome. That basically, sure you can. Now you might be liable for some of the damages that result, but it's not illegal for you to have speech like that. But there are certain like specific incitements to like violence and threats, which are not protected forms of speech. But for the most part, the government has like a strict limitation on its ability to prosecute speech.
Yeah. So the next level would be among private institutions. So this would take two different forms that I want to address. The first one is through social media. Mm-hmm. So through social media, legally, because social media companies are private institutions, First Amendment arguments don't make any sense.
Yeah.
However, there can still be principled free speech arguments that we can have for saying that we don't want a person to be taken off of Facebook for what they said.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a legitimate discussion to have. Again, it's not a First Amendment discussion. It's a discussion of principles.
Yeah. Yeah. What we want in our society, it's basically arguing that what we want is for the benefits of free speech, which have drawbacks as well. But ultimately we assume that in our society with open and free communication and expression, we don't want large, powerful organizations to be able to control the way we think and communicate.
Yeah. And then the other part of that is employment.
Yeah.
So the question is, does free speech mean that you can say whatever you want and not have to be afraid of being fired from your job because of it?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very common one when it comes to discussions about the NFL, with Colin Kaepernick, and there were also some cases in which there were people in the Charlottesville rally where people had been taking pictures of them and putting them on the internet and basically saying, if this person is employed at your place, you should fire them. They're a white supremacist. So that's another sort of discussion based on principles, but not necessarily like the First Amendment. Yeah. Now, again, we can have discussions about whether or not there should be laws and regulations that are put in place in order to prevent businesses from firing people due to political views.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, that doesn't seem like a very conservative thing to do, regulation of business. But, I mean, it's still it is still something that people can make principled arguments for.
Yeah.
But that would not necessarily fall under the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So the other area of this, which conservatives love to bring up, is the idea of public universities.
Yeah.
About whether or not we should allow certain speakers that have maybe deplorable views to speak on college campuses. Now, the right often likes to point to these types of arguments as instances where, there are a bunch of liberal snowflakes on college campuses that don't want to hear other ideas. And, I'm gonna shock a few people. To an extent, I actually agree with them.
Mm-hmm.
That might not shock too many people too much because I have kind of made similar arguments in the past, but I actually do, to an extent, agree with them. I mean, I would say that nobody is entitled to that platform. Mm-hmm. So, like, no idiot with an opinion is entitled to having that platform. So, like, I'm not saying that universities can't be choosy, but, I mean, if you have a guy, like Ben Shapiro, who I very much disagree with Ben Shapiro. I think that, I think it's very possible that he's a charlatan. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's just, he just doesn't know what he's talking about, but he really does believe what he's saying. But look, he has a big following. A lot of people listen to him. He does have a lot of social power in the United States. So I would say, let him speak. Mm-hmm. Let him come to the college campus. Let him speak. And also, let other people protest what he says. I don't think that we should necessarily be protesting his right to be there, but protest what he's saying.
Yeah.
Go into those forums, like, because he often does allow college students to come up and try to give rebuttals to him. Mm-hmm. Let them do that. Let them argue against him. If you have, if people are coming prepared, if you have smart people that are prepared, you should be able to defeat his ideas because most of them are idiotic.
Yeah, sure.
No, he's a very talented debater, so oftentimes he's able to make really stupid arguments sound really good because, he's very talented. Yeah. But that's how you should fight against that. Yeah. Not through deplatforming.
Yeah. Ultimately, deplatforming, or attempting to deplatform, it just gives people a different kind of opportunity. They can play the wounded intellectual who can't speak, and now he's got a little bit more credibility because all of a sudden he's the person that's trying to speak the truth that no one will listen to. But ultimately, to your point, Nathan, it's we're not saying that you should, have only people up there that you disagree with, or have only people up there that you agree with, but rather that, or even that you should just try to play both sides of an issue, but rather that you should air the issues. You should have, perspectives that are held in good faith, brought out because sunlight is the best disinfectant. By having these conversations, we are giving, each argument its opportunity to fail or succeed. And ultimately, you do give someone a disproportionate treatment, which can be beneficial or harmful when you try to shut them up.
Yeah. One of my one of my favorite jokes that I heard on this was made by an old acquaintance of mine. And he was talking about the idea of free speech zones on college campuses. And he was like, that's interesting because I always thought that a free speech zone was supposed to be roughly the same size and shape of the United States.
Nice. Yeah. And, you know, with the exception of things like, you know, reasonable use and things like that, it makes sense to allow people to just to use these spaces. Now, I will say that in a number of the college campus, you know, speech cases that conservatives like to bring up, they weren't actually like prevented from speaking. They were just required to comply with the existing policies of the university, which they refuse to do. And one of them is often if the university determines that you coming to speak will cause like unrest, you have to hire like security so that you can, you know, keep the venue secure and safe and have, you know, students not come in there and like try to attack anybody. So like, but the fact that it seems like a pretty reasonable requirement that if you're going to come speak and you're going to cause unrest, you should quell that unrest in a reasonable way.
Yeah. It's like, we're not going, like, you can come to our campus and use our platform, but we're not going to expend a bunch of resources on it. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of periodically, I went to the University of Virginia, and in the middle of grounds, there is an amphitheater. And
campus. It's a campus.
It's grounds.
It's campus.
You don't know what you're talking about.
It's a campus. Don't give me that.
Well, what are campuses made of, Nathan? Grounds.
Well, what are grounds made of?
It's like Hogwarts.
Campus.
Hogwarts has grounds.
It's made of campus.
Anyway, in the
it's
middle
not
of grounds,
Hogwarts.
There was an amphitheater, and periodically, Westboro Baptist Church-esque groups would come to the amphitheater, and they would set up in that space and speak. The amphitheater was public property, public ground, and it didn't have a permit in order to allow people to speak. And these people were like spouting heinous, like truly heinous things.
I saw that when I was at JMU too.
Yeah.
Like, there were places which people would come and do that as well.
And students, you know, would be watching. Inevitably, people would gather to watch, kind of like you might watch a car crash, and they would yell at them, like straight to their face. They would call them sinners and lesbians and fornicators and stuff like that. And I remember the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. This was like really powerful to me. He was influential to everybody. Like everybody knew him, knew his face, and he came out into the middle of the amphitheater and he said to all the students, "If you don't want to hear this, don't listen. Go about your day, go to your classes. Do not do anything to these folks. They have the right to be here. You know, this is a public space, and if you don't, I don't want to listen to them, and so I'm not going to. I give you that same advice."
Yeah.
And it was really powerful to see someone in a position of power with so much calm and poise, like defend ideas that actually attacked him. He was a gay man.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting because I actually had, when that happened on my campus, there was I don't know if I would say opposite experience, but there was a different experience which kind of really influenced my thoughts on this, where this particular guy who was, he was spouting hatreds, telling everybody they were going to hell, was being ridiculously anti-gay, anti-woman, spouting a bunch of hatred. A bunch of students from JMU, like one of them got a guitar, and they started singing to drown him out. And they were singing like about how God loves everybody, you should feel loved no matter who you are. And look, I'm not religious, but when people are using religion in order to spread love, I think that's the best use of religion.
Yeah.
Like that's the point. And if your religion tells you to spread love, then power to you. I think that's a good religion. You should, continue to do that. And it was just like this guy was using his free speech, but other people were using their free speech in order to basically tell him, like, dude, we're not with you. We're not with you. We're here to spread love. And the weirdest part of this was that clip went viral, and Glenn Beck did a story on it, and he was speaking like in favor of the students that were drowning this guy out. Like I remember watching this video of Glenn Beck talking about like, you know, how, oh, this is great. They were drowning this guy out with love and not hate. And I'm like,
do you know who you are? Have you read your books?
well, this was back when he was pretending to be reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, he was crazy, and then he tried to pretend to be reasonable, and now he's back to being crazy again.
Yeah.
But that was powerful for me.
Yeah.
Because people were able to use their free speech to make this guy look like the asshole that he was.
Yeah. Which is not a limitation of free speech, which is the worry that I have when conservatives bemoan basically social rebuke against bad ideas.
Yeah.
Like that's part
their
of what
free
makes
speech.
that is part of what makes our society good is not just that you have the ability to speak, but that speech has consequences, and not necessarily, you know, not going to jail, but like that the social fabric of our society will weigh your speech, and the people who wish to listen can listen, and the people who don't, you know, that there's an impact, which I think is one of the negative results of the anonymity of some social media platforms, is that yes, you can speak, but having, you know, being a troll, having bad arguments, being evil and bad to people, like there's no problem with it. There's no consequences.
Yeah. And that brings us to the fact that the principles that we have been discussing, in which we are agreeing with what a lot of conservatives are saying, is not universally applied by those same conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the biggest examples, one of the most relevant examples, would be the protests.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, look, if conservatives do want to bring out the fact that there was some rioting and looting that was going on, and they want to condemn that, fine, go right ahead.
They should. Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
Yeah, we have too. You know, we've condemned destruction of property,
specifically the rioters and the looters, not everybody that surrounded the rioters and the looters.
Exactly. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the people that have had their free speech rights trampled during this time period have been peaceful protesters. There was the protesters in front of the church that Trump had his photo shoot on, that, you know, were tear gassed in order to get out of the way. Those were peaceful protesters. You know, we talked to our friend Ted, who was just sitting on his front porch and he got tear gassed. Like, these same conservatives, if they were principled, they would be saying this is not okay.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I don't agree with what these Black Lives Matter people are protesting, which, you know, I mean, yeah, make that argument. They're protesting that Black Lives Matter. I don't agree with that. Whatever. Fine. Make that argument. But you're not satisfying your own principles.
Yeah.
Because you say that it should be about a free exchange of ideas and that people should not be, you know, your argument is people should not be oppressed by private companies because of their free speech. But it's okay for them to be oppressed by the government?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Excuse me. That's in the
you hated the
Constitution.
Yeah, that one's actually in the Constitution.
Yeah.
I mean, you have, you know, Ben Shapiro has said almost nothing about like in condemnation of the actions. Dave Rubin, hell, Tom Cotton wrote that hilariously
evil
op-ed in the New York Times in which he argued for deploying military troops to go quell protesters.
Yeah.
And then when the New York Times added an editor's note about like, hey, by the way, screw this guy, he's not affiliated with us, he was like, oh my God, they're infringing on my free speech by putting an editor's note at the beginning. It's like, of
their own paper.
Yeah, of an article in which you wrote, like, in favor of using the military to infringe on people's free speech. Like, what?
And the thing is, we know that this is not about, like, the violent protests. We know this is about shutting people up and creating disincentives for people to go out there and bravely speak. We know it's about using the government to create consequences for speech, which is against, the First Amendment. Specifically, William Barr has instructed the Justice Department to, instead of prosecuting for lower crimes like being out past curfew or something like that, he's trying to push them to prosecute for things like sedition and terrorism, which is like insane. And again, we know this is not about violence because the kinds of laws that have been implemented over the last few years to try to fight these protests. So starting in like 2016 with the Dakota Access Pipeline, we started to see an uptick in the criminalization and an increase in the penalties associated with criminal acts that go along with protesting. So we're not talking about violent criminal acts. We're talking about things like trespassing and things like that. But, numerous states after the Dakota Access Pipeline upped the charges for protesting near critical infrastructure to a felony charge. And since 2016, 14 states have enacted new laws to restrict peaceful assembly. So that's things like, excessive permitting, limiting where people can protest, things like that. And just back in August, after 60 days of protesting in Tennessee, the Republican Governor Bill Lee signed a new law that made it a felony to participate in certain types of protests like camping overnight on state property. So we're talking about upping things that are usually misdemeanors, low-level like incentives, to like serious crimes in order to stop people from doing like very like peaceful protests. So we can literally see that they're not worried. They're not actually focused on violence. They're focused on trying to get people to go home and stop working on this thing. And a big thing about the Tennessee case is that in Tennessee, if you're convicted of a felony, you lose your voting rights. So when they make it a felony to protest, they're not only preventing people from protesting, they're disenfranchising those same people.
Yeah. That's completely fascistic.
Yeah.
Like, and again,
it's totally hypocritical.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of these libertarian commentators that I've been talking about, their whole thing is small government. But apparently, when the government is using their power in order to create anti-protest laws against leftists, that's okay. Yeah, it's the thing that I've been noticing over the years is that, like, I grew up believing deeply in small government, that government is bad at its job. And so what we should try to do is divest the government of every job that isn't required. And the argument goes the only required job of government is like the key stuff: defense, policing, maybe fire, depending on which libertarians you ask. But what you find is then the arguments don't talk about free government or small government. They talk about government exclusively invested in these functions: a huge military and no welfare system, a huge and well-fortified police force, but no support for communities that are in need. Like, it's specifically about investing heavily in these functions that, we should be limiting. Because the assumption is ultimately that every part of government is the worst part, so you should only keep the ones that only government can do. Michael and I are trying to take a principled stance. In this, we have defended the rights of Ben Shapiro and insane, horrifically hateful preachers to come onto college campuses and to spew whatever bullshit they want to spew. I would like to see some of them do the same. I would like to see them do the same with protesters. And look, here's how you can tell someone who doesn't have principles when it comes to free speech. When the shoe's on the other foot, when it's someone they disagree with who's having their free speech violated, if they keep their mouth shut, it's not about a principle. It's about a partisan ideology, and they're rigging the game in their favor. And now, instead of highlights, because we
we actually realized that we don't really have any. We're going to do a moment of silence for the fallen American hero, the notorious Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And thank you so much for listening to The Perspectrum. You'll hear from us again next week.